Hello, and welcome to the Spiritual Intelligence Briefing. I'm super excited to have you with me tonight. We got a lot of ground to cover. This is number 24. God warned Lincoln 10 times. If you were with us last time we talked about Lincoln, we talked about a plethora of dreams that he had. He was, as far as history records, probably the most prolific dreamer president. And we kind of did a brief summary of some of the dreams, but we're going to do a deep dive, particularly on what I call Lincoln's early warning system. So thank you for joining us. It's good to have you here. Hello, Autumn from Brighton, Colorado. And Kathy, not Tom, from Northeast Ohio. All right, it's raining out there. It's raining here too. Clear Lake, California. Hello, Laney from Detroit. It's good to see you. Shalom, Mike from Virginia. Elaine from Australia. Thank you. I think you get the award so far for coming the farthest. Western New York. Holly, it's good to see you. Hello. Shalom. Sylvia. Hello from Texas. Hey there. It's good to see you. Hello, Trish from Wyoming. All right. Blessings from Singapore. I love Singapore. It's been one of my favorite places to visit. I've been there a handful of times. Singapore is amazing. Hello, Tiffany. Hello, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hello from Oklahoma. Also Pennsylvania. Lakewood, California. Another from Pennsylvania. Hey, it's good to see all of you. One of the most fascinating things for me is the passion that I have for dreams and being able to illustrate just not how God speaks biblically, but doing the deep dive of biblical dream interpretation was absolutely profound because I learned so much that nobody ever said. I've never heard anybody talk about in depth the dreams in the Bible. So what's fascinating is as I continue to dive into historic dreams, now looking at the dreams of presidents, there's some things that are jumping out that I'm like, I can't believe nobody's ever talked about this stuff. And I think what it is that God leaves like a trail of breadcrumbs hidden in history for us to discover. And I think we just happen to be the ones that are going down this rabbit trail. But the amount of research I've bought probably 10 or 15 books in the last 3 days, all related to people from Lincoln's cabinet, from Stanton, his Secretary of War, to Stewart, his Foreign Secretary, Secretary of State, to Gideon Welles, the Secretary of the Navy, and all of that because of an account that I had about a cabinet meeting that Lincoln had at noon on April 14th of 1865, of course, the day that he was shot. So if you try to look it up, there's not a lot in history. If you put in April 14th, 1865, like the internet just screams at you, Lincoln was shot, Lincoln was shot. It's like, we know Lincoln was shot, but trying to find out from the cabinet meeting what happened has caused me to dig into the diaries of Gideon Welles, the autobiographies, even the biographies of Stanton and some of the others. And it's been absolutely fascinating to then see the story unfold. Like, why was Grant in the cabinet meeting? Grant was a general. Like, why was he in the cabinet meeting? Well, he was in the cabinet meeting because of concern that the president had with what was happening in Virginia, and he got power played by one of his cabinet secretaries. And so they called Grant back. And because Grant was in town and he met with one of the secretaries and had a party at his house the night before, Lincoln said, well, go ahead and invite him to the cabinet meeting the next day. And so that's why we end up with Ulysses S. Grant in the room. And it's interesting because a part of the conversation is some of the things that President Lincoln says to Grant. So what's fascinating is, I don't know if I shared this last time, but I was going to do episode 22, Did God Warn Lincoln? I was going to do that on the Saturday night of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I was just in a funk. I just didn't feel like doing a broadcast, and I'm just like, I'm just, for some reason, it just seemed like something wasn't right. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go take my mom to dinner and spend some time with her. And of course, while we're out doing all that, I start to get notices and I start to see that the event at the White House Correspondents' Dinner happened, an attempted assassination once again on the president, but not just the president, on potentially members of his cabinet, because his whole staff was there, right? Excuse me. So I'm blown away because what I was going to talk about that night was, did God warn Lincoln? Specifically, did he warn him about what? Well, it's easy to assume, did he warn him about his own assassination? Because when we think of President Abraham Lincoln, we think of the tragedy that happened at Ford's Theater on April 14th, 1865. And of course, he died early in the morning of April 15th, 1865. And so it's fascinating that that was the time when they were actually having the White House Correspondents' Dinner, when I was going to do this talk specifically about Lincoln and his dreams, but not just his dreams, because we kind of did this a little bit before, where we talked about the dreams that he had about his dead son Willie, the son that passed away, and how he missed him, and how he loved getting, he felt like he almost got visited from his son, and he would stand by his bedside. And there's not a whole lot of information on what happened in those dreams, other than when somebody would bring it up, Lincoln would weep and how much he missed Willie, and he knew that he wasn't there in the dream. But it was just so comforting to have those dreams. We also have the very short dream that we get from one of Lincoln's letters, which, by the way, is a warning. This was June 9th of 1863. And Mrs. Lincoln, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This was part of the letter, an excerpt from the papers and the writings of Lincoln, the complete works of Abraham Lincoln. And we just have this excerpt from this letter dated June 9th, 1863, that says, and again, it's Abraham Lincoln writing to his wife, "Think you had better put Tad's pistol away. I had an ugly dream about him." That was it. So we don't know, well, what did he dream? Did he think he was going to kill somebody? Did you think he was going to take his own life? Of course, they had lost Willie and Mary Todd pretty much the whole time that Lincoln was in office, never came out of mourning. I think she had 7 different seances where they tried to bring the spirit of Willie back because she was in such mourning. And so you would think, if you won the presidency of the United States and you're living in the White House with your family, like, this would be some of the happiest, most memorable times of your life. And for the Lincolns, it was literally pure hell. Like, as soon as he wins the election, I think even before he's inaugurated, the South secedes. We go to war. We start civil war. It's absolutely insane. He's literally in office a month, and the Confederacy attacks Fort Sumter. So things began to move quick. And then, of course, Willie gets scarlet fever and dies the night that they're having a state dinner at the White House. And it just really kind of set them both back. And then Lincoln, of course, spent a lot of his time, as men tend to do, in the search for information down at the telegraph office. He'd ride his horse to the telegraph office from the White House, and he would sit there with the telegraph operator most of the day and watch the messages come in. And there were, 100,000 or tens of thousands of messages that would come in, and he would get them hot off the press. Mostly. It's interesting because the day that they had the Republican National Convention to nominate him for being reelected, the country's in the middle of a civil war. Imagine if your favorite president, or not your so favorite president, suddenly gets elected, and now the country is at civil war. How would people feel about that person that was elected, and now the country is at war with themselves? It was probably a big deal. One of the things that I think gets lost in the fluff about when we're talking about Lincoln and we're talking about his time in the Civil War is the fact that people believe, that they really believe this, that President Donald Trump is controversial. And for our time, I guess he is. But he's a church picnic, literally, like compared to Lincoln. The Republicans never thought Lincoln would win the nomination. It was a power play where they put his name forward to try to draw votes from somebody else. So the nomination would go somewhere, and then somebody quit, and then something else happened. And the next thing you know, a guy that's never been in office, he's been in Congress for 1 year. He's had 3 nervous breakdowns and been hospitalized, 2 failed businesses. He lost his fiance. The guy's been like in chronic stress and depression his entire life. By the way, the year before he ran for Congress, because he knew he was going to be homeless, literally. And so he wanted a job. And so he's like, well, I'll try. Every election that he tried up until that point, he failed and he lost. And he wins and gets elected to Congress. He's in Congress 1 year and he wins the nomination completely by accident, not because they had an overwhelming sense of belief in who Lincoln was. Again, it was a power play on the leadership of the party. And they end up with Lincoln as their nominee, and they literally can't believe it. So his own party didn't support him to a large extent. He wins the election. Now he's not on the ballot. He's not even on the ballot in the South at all. 0 votes in the South. The Republicans hate him. The stalwarts of the Republican Party can't stand him. And then there's the Democrats, which they absolutely hate him. But at least they're still in the Union. And then there's the people who quit the country, who don't even put him on the ballot. So it's absolutely incredible the amount of opposition that he has. He wins the election, even with 0 votes in the South at all. And before the inauguration, the South secedes. They literally quit the nation because this guy won the election. You know, I know a lot of people hate President Trump, but we didn't have states seceding before the guy got inaugurated. And they didn't shut him out of the ballot in the entire sections of the country, supposedly, or cities in the country that hate him. I mean, Trump derangement syndrome goes pretty deep in certain circles, but it's not as deep as Lincoln derangement syndrome. Like these people were absolutely crazy. Did not let him get on the ballot. He wins. We're quitting the country. We're getting states together. We're creating a confederacy. We're out of here. We're done. So this is the environment that Lincoln is living his life, his best life as president. And all the while, in the book's Recollections of Abraham Lincoln by Ward Hill Layman, he talks about how he kind of had a understanding of his own mortality. He believed he was going to die. He likely believed he was going to die in office. And if he didn't before he went in, when he had the mirror apparition, which I talk about in the first video about Lincoln, where he looks in the mirror and he sees 2 reflections of himself. One is another face, but the other one was his whole body laying down, and it's gaunt and it looks much worse. And when he saw it 3 times, when he told his wife, she said, I think it means you're going to get reelected, but you're going to die during your 2nd term. Again, be very careful who you let speak interpretation over you, because that's what happened. It was accurate. And I don't know if it's because he accepted that that's what was going to happen, or it could very well be that he had finished the race, kept the faith, and he was done. I think it's interesting that he was shot on 4/14, and we think of Esther 4/14. Perhaps you came to your royal position for such a time as this. So perhaps it was literally his mission was fulfilled. The Civil War ended 5 days before he was shot. 5 days of peace was all he had. And the generals still hadn't even made it back to Washington yet. So they were still giving war reports, including the all famous cabinet meeting on April 14th, 1865. So again, I want to talk about the periphery, and then I want to go center mass on the warning system that we're going to talk about, because I did a lot of research on this. And one of the things I found in history is so ridiculously mind-blowing. I can't even hardly believe it's real. So I looked it up through 2 different historical means of research. One is the official record of the Navy, and the other one is the personal diary of the Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Welles. Now, it's interesting because when I did the first one, somebody asked me, so Lincoln has this dream about the ship that he says is like a warning system. He has this recurring dream, and he knows that every time he has this dream, that it means something significant on the national level is going to happen that day. And they asked me the question, do you know anybody else that has had something like this? And I started thinking about it. And as you all know from knowing me, the very first place that my mind goes, is back to scripture. Was there an early warning system of potential danger or imminent death that was used through dreams multiple times? And I'm like, yes, there was. Yes, there was. Now, there's not a lot of repeat dreamers in the Bible. I mean, Jacob had 2 dreams. Joseph in the Old Testament had 2 dreams. Pharaoh had 2 dreams. Nebuchadnezzar had 2 dreams. Daniel had a dream, and then he had some visions. And then you get into the New Testament, and there's the wise men, there's Pilate's wife, and then there's 4 dreams that Joseph has. So if somebody asks you, who's the most prolific dreamer in the Bible? Say Joseph. Because Joseph in the Old Testament he had 2 dreams. He interpreted 2 in prison. He interpreted the 2 dreams of Pharaoh. So there's 6 dreams associated with him. And then Joseph in the New Testament actually had 4 dreams. So the first dream is the angel of the Lord appears to him and says, I want you to marry Mary. I call it the Mary dream. Now, again, remember, Mary is with child. She goes and tells Joseph. Joseph says, basically, I'm going to divorce her quietly and put her away. And the angel of the Lord appears to him and says, don't. Mary, what's happening is from the Holy Spirit, blah, blah, blah. And so that's his first warning. The second warning comes after the visit of the wise men. And they stop and see Herod on the way in. And Herod says, well, tell me where the child is so that I can go and worship him too. And they were warned in a dream not to go back to see Herod, which would have caused an international incident. Because if you look historically, these were likely kings. In fact, a lot of people believe some of them were the kings from Babylon. They could have included the wise men from Babylon, which would have been a contemporary, not at that time because it was hundreds of years later. But who would have been, if they existed in the same time, basically a contemporary of Daniel, because they were wise men from the East. But they were likely kings, or they were ambassadors on behalf of kings of nations. So if Herod would have wanted to, if they wouldn't have wanted to tell Herod, and Herod would have wanted to go to war with them, it would have been an international incident. So then Joseph gets a dream and says, leave now, move to Egypt. Herod's trying to kill your son. So he does. Then he gets another dream that says, okay, Herod is dead. You can move back. So then he moves back, and then he says, well, then move to Nazareth. So 3 different times. And it was because of life and death. And there were, I don't know, hundreds at least of children that died because the wise men didn't go back and tell Herod where Jesus was, because then Herod would have likely gone and killed Jesus, of course, prematurely. So Herod just decides, I'm going to kill every male child under 2 years old. And so that causes the fulfillment of the prophecy. Rachel is weeping. There's weeping in Ramah, and refuses to be comforted for her children. So yes, in answer to that question, there is a biblical precedent for an early warning system used multiple times where it's the same dream. Now, the dream is the angel of the Lord is appearing and saying, go here, go there, go there. So it's a little bit different, but it's fascinating, the context of the dream of the ship. So, okay, let's go back to Lincoln. So Lincoln had the dream about Tad, put up Tad's gun, June 9th, 1863. That's kind of in the middle. Put up Tad's gun. I had a horrible dream about him. Then he had the dreams of Willie, which were comforting dreams. Then he had the dream right on or about April 1st of 1865, where he's laying in bed. He gets up, he walks through the White House. Again, we cover that in the last video that we do, and I'll tag that here below if you haven't seen it. It's I believe it's Spiritual Intelligence Briefing number 22. The Dreams of Lincoln. And everybody's like, that's a very important dream because he ends up in the East Room. There's a body on the table. Everybody's mourning. He looks at the Marine Guard who died in the White House, and he says, "The president, sir, he was killed by an assassin." So now there's actually some people that believed what he was seeing was a foreshadowing of JFK's death, which I think is interesting because I don't know if JFK ever lied in state in the East Room. I don't believe that he did. Now, I don't know that Lincoln ever was lying in state in the East Room. So this would be a point of topic, or somebody can look this up. Was there ever a president who was assassinated who lied in state in the East Room of the White House? They've had, I think, 6 or 7 funerals in the East Room. And I know that they've had 7 or so, up to 14 weddings, because I've looked into the history of the East Room because of this dream. But I forget specifically if there was ever a president, a sitting president, that was assassinated in office and then lied in state. And the reason we want to know is we want to know, what was Lincoln seeing? Because people just assume he was seeing his own death. Now, I think that's what he assumed too. And it could have been a warning about his death, but God doesn't tell him how to prevent his death. He doesn't say avoid actors or forget entertainment. Don't watch TV. I mean, go to the theater. He doesn't say any of that, disregard Ford. He doesn't take the Chevy. God doesn't say any of these things related to how he could have avoided being assassinated on the night of April 14th, 1865 at Ford's Theater. Now, as you probably know, Lincoln wasn't the only target. Andrew Johnson was the VP. He was also a target. Seward was also a target, who was the Secretary of State. So they were trying to do a decapitation strike and take out the whole upper echelon of the top 3 people in the line of succession. I believe the only person that actually was killed, though there were some others that were injured, was Abraham Lincoln. I believe that's right. If not, please let me know in the comments. And then it brings us to the discussion. So again, the dreams of Willie, the dreams of Tad, the dream of walking through the White House and ending up in the East Room, the president dead, lying in state. And then there comes what I will call the last dream, which, by the way, is also the first dream that's ever recorded of Abraham Lincoln. It's this recurring dream that he has. And we find out about it April 14th, 1865. Again, Grant is visiting. Grant happens to be in town. Go ahead and invite Grant to the cabinet meeting. He comes as a guest to the cabinet meeting. He's sitting there, and he's sitting there, and he has this conversation. And I'm going to read to you from the excerpts of history. So they're not my words. They're directly from the words. One is from Ward Hill Layman, which was his best friend. It was published in 1865, the year that he passed away. The other one is the diary of Gideon Wells, which was published in 1866. Again, Gideon Wells was at the meeting. In reading the account by Ward Hill Layman, I started to get the feeling that Ward Hill Layman heard about what happened, but he might not have been in the room. Why? Because when I've looked up the dreams of Lincoln, I've seen articles that listed in a little bit more detail his response to Gideon Wells's question about telling me the dream, because he lists several times that he had this dream before. So in Recollections of Lincoln, 1847 to 1865, the book by Ward Hill Layman, again, his law partner, his best friend, and his bodyguard, I think he says 2 or 3. So I'm like, well, let's find the diaries of other people that were in the room. So I got to go in to look into ebooks and historic writings, and some is, in places on the internet that you can find that you can get access to them for free. Others, they've reprinted them and republished them and then copyrighted them again. And so you have to buy them from Amazon. And so I bought a ton of books in pursuit of the truth of this question, about as much detail as I can get about the recurring warning dream of Abraham Lincoln. And again, we're going to start with the place that there is a scriptural precedence that God can provide a warning dream for you. Okay, now, by the way, what's really interesting is I found that the Secretary of Defense during the time of Lincoln was called SecWar, the Secretary of War, like we have a Secretary of War now. So I found the diary of the Secretary of War, who was also in the cabinet meeting, as well as his name was Edwin Stanton, as well as the Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Welles. So I have two diaries of two cabinet members that we know were in the room. The one place I haven't looked yet that is likely another possible place to look at a different account of this would be the diary of Ulysses S. Grant. I don't know if he wrote of an account. Now, he's typically not invited to cabinet meetings, so it may or may not be something that he wrote about. But all of his adventures in the Civil War and then, his time as president, and it's probably a lot of other things that he wrote about. But because it was the day that Lincoln was shot, it might have been significant enough for him to write about it. Okay, so I'm going to read to you two versions of the Wells account. And then I'm going to read to you, first I'm going to read to you one version of the Wells account, and then I want you to listen to the differences that I actually got from the very diary of Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy, under Lincoln and Johnson. And then I'm going to read to you SecWar's account, Edwin Stanton, and you're going to see what Stanton had to say. And then we're going to get into the specifics, because the reason why we're going down this rabbit hole is because they're at this place. They're at this cabinet meeting. And let me just read the first account to you, and then we'll get into exactly why we're going to get into the specifics. So here's one account. Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy, made this notation in his diary. Now, I have his diary, and it's not exactly word for word, but it's close. So here's what he says. Congratulations were interchanged, and earnest inquiry was made. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share this document so you can see it as well. I want you to see this. I want you to get this. It's an absolutely what we're seeing, if you don't kind of understand where I'm coming from, is this is mind-blowing U.S. history. Like, this is absolutely mind-blowing history, because when God started speaking to me about dreams, I started asking the question, if we can get information directly from God, wouldn't that be the best intelligence on the planet? Yeah. Well, then shouldn't we be briefing the president on the best intelligence on the planet like they did Nebuchadnezzar the Great and Pharaoh of Egypt? Yeah, we should be. So what if we started diving into dreams? Because once you settle the fact that all dreams come from God and you can trust the source, the intel is good, then let's go deep into this and understand the codes and the hidden language. And the Bible talks about, he reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. That's Daniel 2:22. Jesus also talks about why do you speak to us in parables? He says, and parables again are the language of dreams. It's the parabolic language or figurative language of God. And he says, because the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. So we know that God hides secrets, that there are hidden things, that there are secrets in the kingdom of heaven, and that they're hidden in a figurative language, which is what dreams are. So when we know this, we know that all dreams come from God. So we don't have to spend time, I had a dream I didn't like, and it was weird, and maybe I need to rebuke it. We don't have to spend any time doing that. We know they're all from God, number one. Number two, we know their intelligence. And number three, we know they're very often hiding secrets. So if you look at a dream at face value, you're going to miss the secrets every single time and twice on Sunday. So don't just look at the base level value of, I think the dream is literal. And a lot of people that are sharing dreams, especially prophetic voices, do this all the time because they're used to hearing God kind of in the literal sense. God said to me this about this person is a lot of what's happening right now on the internet, which Anyway, I won't comment on that. But when God speaks to you in a dream, he's hiding information. So if he tells you something in the figurative language that this person is the great white owl, it probably doesn't mean literally. So it means there's a code in there, or there's something in there to discover. It means there's a hidden secret. And so if we just assume, well, owls are in witchcraft and Harry Potter, so they're bad, so this person's bad, you're going to miss it probably about every single time. All right, we got Bayonne, New Jersey in the house. Good deal. So I want to say that because it's important to understand God hides secrets in dreams. I'm about to share with you what I believe, because I used to think that Lincoln going through the White House, getting to the East Room, hearing about there's a president, sir, he was killed by an assassin, was Lincoln's most profound dream. I don't anymore. His recurring dream is the most profound dream, and it's going to absolutely, like, you are literally not going to believe what I share with you at the end that I found out about this dream. It's absolutely the most mind-blowing thing, and it's almost like God hid it just for me. Because the way that I search for information is I download these ebooks and then I go Control F, which is find, and then I type in like the word dream. Because some of these books are 1,000 pages long. I don't have time to read all these books. So I want to get to, let's talk about the cabinet meeting and Lincoln's dream. So I'm searching in a very particular way with a very limited window through kind of a broad swath of history of people that I know were in the room on the day of April 14th, 1865 at President Lincoln's final cabinet meeting where he shares his final dream. We also end up finding that it's his first recorded dream, as far as we can tell in scripture. Why? This is what I'm going to share with you. Your mind is going to explode. You're going to love this. This information is going to change your life. And I mean that sincerely. So stick with me. Let me share my screen here. I want you to see this whole thing so you can follow along. But it is absolutely incredible. Okay, so here we go. Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy, made this notation in his diary regarding the cabinet meeting that occurred at noon on the day of the assassination of Lincoln. Congratulations were interchanged. Let me move this out of the way. Congratulations were interchanged, and earnest inquiry was made whether any information had been received from General Sherman. Now, Sherman signed with General Lee at Appomattox, I think on the 9th, so literally 5 days before. General Grant, who was invited to remain, said he was expecting hourly to hear from Sherman. Now, again, General Grant's normally not at a cabinet meeting. He happened to be in town. He was kind of called to come back because of what is called the Virginia incident, where Stanton went around the president and implemented his own policy, but the president really didn't do anything about it. And there's this whole power struggle that's happening in the cabinet. And so anyway, Grant's come back to Washington. He gets there the 13th. They have a big party at, I believe it's at Edwin Stanton's house, who's the Secretary of War. And he gets invited he meets with the president. He gets invited. Hey, why don't you come to the cabinet meeting since you're in town? General Grant, who was invited to remain, said he was expecting hourly to hear from Sherman and had a good deal of anxiety on the subject. The president remarked that the news would come soon and come favorably. He had no doubt. Interesting that he says that in this account. For he had last night his usual dream, which had preceded nearly every important event of the war. I inquired the particulars of this remarkable dream. Now, again, this is Gideon Welles. I inquired the particulars of this remarkable dream. He said it was in my department. It related to the water, that he seemed to be in a singular and indescribable vessel, but was always the same, and that he was moving with great rapidity toward a dark and indefinite shore. that he had the singular dream preceding the firing on Sumter, the battles of Bull Run, Antietam, Gettysburg, Stone River, Vicksburg, Wilmington, etc. Meaning there's likely more, and there's likely more that Lincoln listed, which is why I'm looking for different accounts of what happened in the cabinet meeting on April 14th. General Grant remarked, again, a guest, with some emphasis and asperity that Stone River was no victory. Actually, the Union got their butts kicked and bad. That a few such victories would have ruined the country, and he knew of no important result from it, meaning the Battle of Stone River, which, by the way, is the second Battle of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The president said that perhaps he should not altogether agree with him, but whatever might be the facts, his singular dream preceded that fight. Victory did not always follow his dream. So now he's amending what he said. But he knew the results would be important. He had no doubt that a battle had taken place or was being fought, and that Johnston will be beaten. For I had this strange dream last night. It must relate to Sherman. My thoughts are in that direction. I know of no other very important event that is likely to occur. He did not know his own assassination was impending that very day. So now this was an article I found that said this was a notation in Gideon Welles, the Secretary of the Navy's diary. So I'm like, well, people write whatever they want. So let's find the diary of Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy under Lincoln and Johnson. And so I found it. I bought the book. I searched the book. And this is a direct quote from the diary of Gideon Welles, 1866. Inquiry had been made as to Army news on the first of the cabinet, meaning the top of the cabinet meeting, which started at noon, and especially if any information had been received from Sherman. None of the members had heard anything, and Stanton, again, the Secretary of War, who makes it a point to be late. See, each of these people add color to the picture of what we're seeing, and who has the telegraph in his department, had not arrived. So Stanton's going to come in and he's going to read the latest messages. General Grant, who was president, said he was hourly expecting word. The president remarked he had no doubt, come soon and come favorably, for he had last night the usual dream which preceded nearly every great important event of the war. Generally, the news had he says, now again, this is different from the other account we just read that's also attributed to Gideon Welles, but this is Gideon Welles's actual words in the book he wrote in 1866, his diary. Generally, the news had been favorable, which succeeded this dream, and the dream itself was always the same. So Gideon Welles inquires, I inquired what this remarkable dream could be. Now, there's other brief summaries of this moment in U.S. history where they say they're in the cabinet meeting, and they say that, they're asking, has anybody heard from Sherman? And he looks at Grant. And of course, I didn't realize that Grant's normally not in a cabinet meeting. Of course, he isn't, but I didn't realize that as I had read this before. And then I realized, well, this is why Grant's in town, because of the Virginia incident. And then he spent the night, and then he had a party with cabinet members, and he went in to see the president. And the president said, why don't you stay for the cabinet meeting? That's why Grant's even there. It's interesting because Grant's a big part of this. Because Grant's the one that says, when he says, I had this dream, it's about the ship and going to a dark and distant shore. And by the way, I had it before, Bull Run and Antietam and Stone River and Vicksburg and Gettysburg. And Grant is like, sir, we didn't win all those battles because you said the news was going to be favorable. And he said, well, he kind of Lincoln backsteps his own thought and says, well, it'll be an event of national importance. And then he says, it has to be about Sherman because I know of nothing. Basically, nothing else is happening. Lee's defeated, right? He signs at Appomattox 5 days ago. They're chasing down Johnston, and there might be a little skirmish, but they know that he's going to surrender anyway because Lee already surrendered, and they're hoping that goes without incident. So it's like the last thing, like the Civil War is officially over, people, but somebody's got to tell the other Confederate general to stop fighting, and that's what Sherman's going to do, and then Sherman's going to come back to D.C. So Lincoln's like, that's the only thing going on in the country right now. The war's over. Appomattox is done. Lee's defeated. He signed. So he's like, and that's why he says, I know of nothing else of national importance that could happen. So the news must be about Sherman. That's what he says. This is what he's thinking. So this is fascinating. And let's get back into it a little bit deeper. That's why what also is interesting is there's another version of this where he's talking to Grant, and in the conversation with Grant, he says, well, I had my usual dream last night. And they say Gideon Wells was the one that said, well, what was the dream? This is important because the Gideon Wells is the Secretary of the Navy. God has given us multiple dreams about the Secretary of the Navy recently. And the Secretary of the Navy represents, because Lincoln looks at him and he says, it's in your department. What's in your department? The fact that I've had a recurring dream that's warned of events of national importance no less than 8 different times. So spiritual intelligence is in the department of SecNav, the Secretary of the Navy. And to follow up with that, the Secretary of the Navy then says, tell me your dream, sir. Or he, as he says here, I inquired what this remarkable dream would be. So we have 2 different things that make a strong case that Gideon Wells and the Secretary of the Navy in this whole historic discourse represents the anointing of spiritual intelligence and the ability, like a Joseph or a Daniel, to hear a dream and to be able to provide a level of context. Though Gideon Wells doesn't interpret the dream for Lincoln because Lincoln already assumes he knows what it means. Okay. He said it related to my element, the water, that he seemed it to be in some singular, indescribable vessel, that he was moving with great rapidity towards an indefinite shore, that he had this dream preceding Sumter. Sumter was April 12th, 1861. The attack on Fort Sumter was the official start of the Civil War. He had the dream with a singular, indescribable vessel. He was moving with great rapidity, preceding Sumter, Bull Run, Antietam, Gettysburg, Stone River, Vicksburg, and Wilmington, etc. Meaning there could have been more. General Grant said Stone River was certainly no victory, and he knew of no great result which followed from it. Because some of these were considered the turning points of the war, or the turning point in the South, or the South never made it this far up north, or they never crossed the blockade again, or whatever. There's all these moments that happen in these battles. And that's what I've been doing a deep dive on. I'm going to share some of that information with you. The president said, however, that this might be this. His dream preceded, the president, however, said that might be, but his dream preceded that fight. The president said, this strange dream again last night, and we shall, judging from the past, have great news very soon. I think it must be from Sherman. My thoughts are in that direction, as most of yours. I write this conversation 3 days after it occurred in Now, again, this is Gideon Wells talking. I write this conversation in his diary 3 days after it occurred in consequence of what took place Friday night. So this was Friday. Friday night, Lincoln shot. Gideon Wells remembers 3 days later, oh my gosh, I should write about the dream that he had, that something of national importance was going to happen. So this is literally written down 3 days after it happens. I write this after the consequence of the events that took place Friday night, but for which the mention of this dream would probably have never been noted. Great events did indeed follow, for within a few hours, the good and gentle, as well as truly great man who narrated his dream closed forever his earthly career. And this again is the diary of Gideon Wells, Secretary of the Navy under Lincoln and Johnson. So again, this is mind-blowing history. I don't know if you guys are getting this yet, but what I'm going to do is what we do in my world is we look for times, dates, and locations. If somebody sends me a dream, I want to know what city you were in when you had the dream. I want to know what time you had the dream and what date you had the dream. Well, guess what? He told us before the firing on Sumter. So he first had the dream when? April 12th, 1861. So we're going to go down and look at all of the battles that are listed. We're going to look at all of the dates. We're going to look at the locations, and we're going to look at what happened. Because God warned Lincoln 8 times with just this dream. And then he warned him With the apparition of the mirror, he warned him about Tad and he warned him about the president lying in state in the White House. So at least 10 different times. But when I give you the number of people that were killed in these battles, he warned of the death of many, many, many people, which is radically significant. Radically significant. So hang with me. And then at the end, like I said, I can't even believe this part that I found at the end. It's going to absolutely and completely blow your mind. And if you don't believe in dreams yet, you will by the end of this. I promise you. So, Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War. This is direct from his book. The Virginia situation was an impossible one for the victorious Union. I'm not going to get into the whole politics of the Virginia situation. Just know that it was a power struggle between him and either Stanton or Seward. I think it was Seward. Anyway, it was an impossible one for the victorious Union. Lincoln's arrangement there could never have won Congress's approval. Indeed, his willingness to end it indicates that he had lost his own support. Lincoln, not Stanton, ended the matter. So this was a power struggle between him and Stanton. Despite this victory, when Sumner saw Stanton the next day, he found him highly excited. Stanton's concern resulted in his summoning Grant to Washington. He arrived late on the afternoon of April 13th and came to the War Department at once. Now, again, Stanton is the Secretary of War. Grant works for Stanton. Meigs noted he was welcomed and thanked. This is Grant. He was welcomed and thanked by the Secretary with much great emotion. So Stanton, because of the Virginia incidents, summons Grant to Washington. He gets there the day before the cabinet meeting. Almost at once, they agreed to order the cessation of drafting and recruiting and to curtail army purchases and remove military restrictions. So again, the war ended 5 days ago. Now they're shifting as the whole War Department into a new era of peacetime. Very historic meetings. After this conference, the Secretary and the General enjoyed a brief, pleasant visit with Lincoln. That night, the Stantons entertained the Grants. A band serenaded the party, and the Secretary and his guests came out on the steps to listen. Fireworks were popping everywhere. Again, the war had ended 5 days ago, and a crowd gathered to cheer the distinguished gathering at the Stanton home. Why? Because the hero general, Ulysses S. Grant, is there. After his guests departed, Stanton worked on through the early morning hours of April 14th, completing a provisional plan for the military government of the defeated South, which Lincoln asked him to prepare. Stanton had already given Lincoln a rough draft on the 13th. Now he had Grant's thoughts on the matter, and they agreed that the Army must temporarily take over the territory. He's talking about the South. It had won. Lincoln had invited Grant to attend a cabinet meeting that day, which again is April 14th. Stanton's haste to prepare this plan is explained by the general's presence. The April 14th meeting opened with an exchange of congratulations between the cabinet officers and Lincoln, cheerful and happy, rejoiced at the imminent prospect of peace and hoped that the passions of war would soon diminish. He expected momentarily to receive news that the rebel General Johnston had surrendered to Sherman, for he had had his usual dream foreshadowing important events. Now, this is Stanton's view, which had come to him before Antietam, which we've heard before, Murfreesboro, which is the first time the Battle of Murfreesboro was mentioned, Gettysburg, and Vicksburg, which we had heard before. But we had also heard Bull Run, Antietam, Stone River, Wilmington, and Sumter, which he doesn't mention. So that's why I'm looking at the Diary of Gideon Welles and Stanton, the Life and Times of Lincoln, Secretary of War. Near the close of the meeting, Stanton remarked that the establishment of civil government and the maintenance of order in the South, where the rebel collapse had ended all government stability, would be the administration's paramount problem. And at Lincoln's request, he had drawn up a tentative plan for the cabinet's consideration. So this is mind-blowing. And we're going to get into a little bit more. I'm going to have to do this quickly because I know our time is short. But I want to share with you some facts about the battles that we're seeing. I'm sorry, some facts specifically about what Lincoln when Lincoln had this dream. So he had it before Sumter. Sumter, April 12th, 1861. Battle facts. It was a Confederate victory. 580 forces were engaged, 80 on the Union side, 500. It was mainly a naval bombardment. There were no casualties. Nobody died, which is interesting. So that's how it happened, a Confederate victory and the official start of the war. The next one that is mentioned, particularly if, because I looked at how they mention this in the various accounts um, the various accounts that we shared, but then I went back and I put these in chronological order. So if it doesn't sound like it's the order that Gideon Wells said, remember I'm looking at a cross between um, Ward Hill Layman's account, Gideon Wells' account, and now Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War's account. And so what I did is I put them in chronological order. Why? Because times, dates, and locations are important. The first recorded dream of the warning of Abraham Lincoln was, and it's interesting because the first bombardment is a naval bombardment. It's the ships bombing Fort Sumter, which is like out on a peninsula, or it's an island, I forget. Anyway, but so then we go to Bull Run. Bull Run was the first Manassas battle. It was July 21st, 1861. It was a stinging defeat for the Union under General Irwin McDowell. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. It was a Confederate victory after the stinging defeat for the Union. Irwin McDowell, who was the commander of the Union Army of Northeast Virginia, is fired. He's relieved, and he's replaced by General George B. McClellan. 60,680 troops were engaged, 28,000 on the Union side, 32 on the Confederate side. There were 4,878 lives lost. So Lincoln was warned on July 21st of 1861, on the morning of July 21st. He woke up with that dream in his mind, and then this happened that day. 4,878 men are killed. Murfreesboro isn't in the battle of or the battle database because there's two battles of Murfreesboro. Stone River is the biggest one, but the first battle of Murfreesboro, and since they say Murfreesboro in one context and they say Stone Rivers in another one, I looked at them as two different battles. Because again, Stone River was such a big battle, they would have said Stone River. They wouldn't have said Murfreesboro. It could have been that Stanton, the Secretary of War, was meaning Stone River when he was referring to it, and he said Murfreesboro. But I'm going by a very literal take because that's all we have is their writings to see what happened on that particular day. Sorry if I'm talking fast. You're right. I get excited about this stuff. This stuff is cool. So anyway, it's July 13th, 1862. It happens in Murfreesboro, Rutherford County, Tennessee. There were 814 and 1,400. So it was a total of 2,214 troops engaged, 15 killed on one side, 25 killed on the other, 40 people died. So that was the Battle of Murfreesboro. Now we go to Antietam. Antietam happened in Washington County, Maryland, September 17th of 1862. The result was a Union victory. In fact, General Lee committed his entire force to the battle, where General McClellan sent in less than 3/4 of his. With the full commitment of McClellan's troops, which outnumbered the Confederate 2-1, the battle might have been a more definite outcome. Instead, McClellan's half-hearted approach allowed Lee to hold ground by shifting forces from threat to threat. Antietam, by the way, is the deadliest one-day battle in American military history. This was September 17th of 1862. 132,000 troops were engaged, 22,717 men dead. So on the morning of September 17th, 1862, By the way, if you look at 917, the alphanumeric code for 9 is I, for 17 is Q. 917 literally means IQ in the alphanumeric code. Just interesting information. 132,000 forces engaged, over 22,000 med dead. The president was warned in advance the night before of this battle. Stone River. Stone River's Murfreesboro was a 3-day battle. It went from December 31st of 1862 to January 2nd of 1863. Now, what's interesting about this is this was, again, Rutherford County, Tennessee, Murfreesboro, Tennessee area. For those of you that live in Franklin, this is not the Battle of Franklin, but the Battle of Franklin was shortly after that as they went north. 76,400 troops engaged, 41,000 on the Union side, 35,000 on the Confederate side, 24,645 men dead. New Year's Eve, 1862. Now we're getting to Vicksburg. I hope you guys are loving this stuff. I hope you guys are finding this absolutely interesting and fascinating. If you're not a history geek like me, just kind of bear with me because I'm almost done with this part, and then I'm going to blow your mind with what God showed me about the rest of this dream. Vicksburg, Warren County, Mississippi, May 18th to July 4th of 1863. 110,000 units engaged, 77,000 on the Union side, 33,000 on the Confederacy, 37,273 men killed. It was a Union victory. It was a 47-day siege. Lieutenant General John Pemberton's Confederate troops surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, together with a Union victory at Gettysburg just a day before. Vicksburg marked a turning point in the fortunes of the Union Army. So when Lincoln says it brings good news, he's thinking of Vicksburg. He's not thinking of Stone River. And then, of course, Gettysburg. Gettysburg was July 1st, my dad's birthday, 1863. It was a Union victory, but Gettysburg ended Confederate General Robert E. Lee's ambitious second quest to invade the North and bring the Civil War to a swift end. Now, again, the Civil War doesn't end until April 9th, 1865. So this is 2 years before the end of the Civil War. The loss there dashed the hopes of the Confederate States of America to become an independent nation. This was absolutely considered probably the turning point of the war. 165,000 troops were engaged, 93,921 on the Union side, 71,699. They couldn't find one more guy to make it 72,000 on the Confederacy side, right? Anyway, 51,112 men dead after the Battle of Gettysburg. And God warned Lincoln July 1st, 1863, before the battle started. And then Wilmington, which is kind of a side note, it was part of the Wilmington campaign. It was fought February 11th to the 22nd of 1865. This is, again, the war ends April 9th of 1865. So this is 2 months before. The Union victory in January on the second front of Fort Fisher meant that Wilmington, 30 miles upriver, could no longer be used by the Confederacy as a port. It fell to Union troops. So there was 18,000 people that fought in this battle, and there was 1,150 people that died in this battle. So there's a lot of history that's happening here. We have the start of the Civil War, April 12th. We have Bull Run, July 21st. Murfreesboro, July 13th of 1862 now. Antietam, September 6th, 17th of 1862. Stone Rivers, New Year's Eve, 1862. Vicksburg, May 18th, 1863. Gettysburg, Wilmington, for a grand total of Civil War losses between these battles of 142,825 souls. 142,000. It's interesting when it's one thing to talk about dreams are a matter of life or death, and then look at like the dream of Gideon in the Bible. Actually, it's the dream of Gideon's enemy where they see the barley loaf rolling down the hill and they see them all. And it says the army with it says though they couldn't measure the amount of horses this army had. So the people was without measure. But it's another thing to be able to go back and historically look at the dates it happened, where they, I got a whole map. I don't have time to show you the whole thing, but it's from Mississippi all the way up to Washington, D.C., all the way down. It's all over. It's just a bunch of dots on the map. But 142,825 souls. By the way, plus one. Because what we're talking about is the account that was given at the cabinet meeting on April 14th, 1865. And of course, we would be remiss to not go back and say God warned Lincoln on the morning of April 14th, 1865. And though they went after Seward and they went after Johnston, as far as I've seen historically, there was one notable casualty that day, and it was President Abraham Lincoln. So it's 142,825 plus one, 826. How fascinating is this? That the first time he gets the dream was at the start of Sumter, April 12th, 1861. And then he gets it at the end of the war. No, the war ended. Well, it sort of ended. Appomattox was signed April 9th, 1865, almost to the day 4 years later. Literally. Minus 3 days, it's to the day 4 years later. From 1861, April 12th, at the start of Sumter, to April 14th, 1865, the death of Lincoln. So it's almost 4 years exactly. But so it tells the start of the Civil War, but when did the Civil War end? Again, they signed Appomattox on April 9th, but Johnston hadn't gotten back. Grant hadn't gotten to Johnston. We knew he was going to surrender. The treaty's already signed, but nobody told the other general. And so they're like, well, I hope that goes well. They've lost, but he doesn't know they lost. And so on April 14th, 1865, they're still, even though they're planning, they're shutting down logistically, they're cutting off the draft, they're getting ready to let a bunch of people to go. They're talking, Stanton works through the night on the pre-war plan for what to do to the Confederacy. And while he's doing that, Abraham Lincoln is having a dream. And he's having a dream about a ship, a fast-moving ship reaching to a distant shore. All right, I can't hold back anymore. I got to tell you this last piece. This last piece is going to absolutely and utterly and completely blow your mind. I don't know if you're ready for this. I wasn't ready for this. Is it possible that God highlighted this dream for a reason? In fact, could there be a literal component to the dream? The start of the Civil War was a naval battle. It was the bombardment of Sumter. The end of the Civil War, the end of this is April 14th, 1865. It's the cabinet meeting. But he sees himself on a ship moving to a dark and distant shore. He's literally crossing over. It's the death of Lincoln. The first dream, almost to the day, 4 years before, announced the start of this. They didn't know the Civil War was going to start that day, people. Announces the start of the Civil War 4 years and 2 days later. It announces on that day, it's going to be the death of Lincoln. Right dead center in the middle of this, there's an event that occurs on April 13th, 1863. I'm sorry. April 13th, 1863 was the halfway point The exact halfway point. April 12th, 1861, the war starts. April 14th, 1865, Lincoln is shot. The halfway point would be April 13th of 1863. There's an event that I found in the diary of Gideon Wells by doing the search that I told you that I do, and I'm going to read it to you, and your mind is going to be completely blown. On the morning of the 13th, Annie, which was the name of a gunboat that they had, acting ensign James S. Williams in command, took her first prize schooner, Maddie, which was attempting to run into Crystal River, Florida, with diverse cargo. So they set up a naval blockade to control traffic in Florida, right? Williams placed a crew on board her prize and sent her to Key West in charge of master mate Marcellus Jackson. About an hour before noon on 28/8. Now, this is directly from this is directly from, in fact, I'm just going to share this with you so you can see it. This is directly from Naval History and Heritage Command. This is a military website about naval history. So I looked up this excerpt specifically because I saw this entry in Gideon Wells's diary. Almost half an hour before noon on 28 April 1865, Annie sighted, chased down, and fired upon a British schooner that escaped into Spanish territorial waters off the coast of Cuba. This action prompted a protest by the English master and added to the already large list of incidents that kept relations between the federal government and the United Kingdom tense throughout the war. This was almost an international incident. It was a British schooner that they chased down, it got away, and it went off the coast of Cuba. So on May 21st, that happened April 28th. On May 21st, Thursday, this is Gideon Wells from his diary. He had an early call from the president who brought a communication from Tasser. Tasser was the ambassador to the U.S. from Spain. And it was to Stewart, the Secretary of State, complaining of a violation of neutral rights by a small pilot boat having a gunboat mounted amidships, and it was believed to be an American vessel. So this vessel that escapes the U.S. Navy goes to Cuba and begins harassing these ships in Cuba. And so Cuba, run by Spain at that time, is reaching out to the Secretary of State of America saying, you got to deal with this American ship. And we're like, it's not our ship. So they believe it was an American vessel. It was annoying the Spanish and other neutral vessels off the coast of Cuba. The president expressed, so he takes it to the president. The president expressed doubts whether it was one of our vessels, but I told him I was inclined to believe it was. That I had last week written Mr. Seward concerning the same craft in answer to Lord Lyons, which was the British ambassador to the U.S., who complained of an outrage of the British schooner. I had also written the admiral on the subject. Guys, the name of the British schooner is Dream. The name of the boat is Dream. This is at almost the exact halfway point between April 12th of 1861 and the firing on Sumter, April 14th, 1865, the death of Lincoln. On 28 April of 1863, a gunboat, Annie, sights, chased, and fired upon Dream, the British schooner, and it escapes into Spanish territorial waters. This is from the Navy's historical website. But at the same time, we have a complaint that comes to the Secretary of State. It's written about in the Secretary of the Navy's diary because he has to talk to the president about this. He had an early call with the president who brought the communication from the U.S. ambassador from Spain to the Secretary of State complaining of violation of rights of a small boat captain, and they think it's an American ship. They get a hold of Lord Lyons, who's the British ambassador to the U.S., who complained of an outrage, and it was the British schooner Dream. I also had written on the subject to Admiral Bailey. Are you kidding me? So the idea that he's on a ship, or another version says we're on a ship chasing a ship to a dark and distant shore. They actually spot a British schooner called Dream. It's the name of the boat. And they chase it, but they don't catch it. And it makes it to Cuba, and it begins to harass and become a problem to the Spanish provincial government there, who then reach out to the Secretary of State Seward. And then the Secretary of the Navy is hearing about it also from the president, is bringing to him a complaint from Lord Lyons, the ambassador of the British Empire to the United States. So it almost causes an international incident between three different powers: Spain, British, and the US government, in the very middle of the time that we're fighting the Civil War in America. And the name of the boat is Dream. So when he says, I had a dream about chasing a ship or being on a ship, and that was quickly, rapidly sailing, it was being chased to a dark and distant shore. And the name of the ship is Dream. Uh, Mic drop. I mean, I don't know what else to say. God warned Lincoln. He gave him an early warning system. He gave him an early warning system of a recurring dream. It happened 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, if you count this cabinet meeting as one of those times. It showed the death. It resulted in warning him of the death of 142,825 plus one, including his own, 826 souls that would be sent to meet their maker through these 9 different dreams that spanned a total of 4 years and 2 days, from April 12th, 1861 to April 14th, 1865, the night of Ford's Theater, the night that Lincoln left with Mary Todd Lincoln. He was happy. He was giddy. He was expecting good news from Sherman. He was hoping Sherman would overtake Johnston, and that would be the complete end of the Civil War. Appomattox was signed 5 days before. His friend Grant is back in town, and all is well with the world. He invited Ward Hill Layman. He actually invited like 9 different people to go to the theater with him, including Seward and I believe including Stanton, and everybody was busy. He wanted Ward Hill Layman to attend the play with him and Mary Todd at Ford's Theater, and he was out of town. Probably the biggest regret of Ward Hill Layman's life is that he wasn't there to protect the president at the moment the president needed him. And so he attended unaccompanied, other than his wife, to Ford's Theater. And the rest, as they say, is history. Does God speak in dreams? Absolutely. Does God warn people in dreams? Absolutely. Does God warn people in dreams about things that are matters of life and death? Absolutely. Does God warn U.S. presidents about potential assassination attempts? Does he warn secretaries of war, secretaries of the Navy? Absolutely, he does. And he does it like he did in the Bible, like he did for Abimelech, like he did for Solomon, like he did for Nebuchadnezzar on 2 different occasions, and Pharaoh in his 2 dreams. He warns the leaders of global empires and world powers in dreams. He still does it today. He still does it in America, and he did it even in our nation's history in antiquity. This should prove to you, from a historical perspective, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I felt I should track down all of the dates. I felt like I should track down the body counts, the result of the battles. Some were small and significant, some were turning points of the war, like Stone River and Gettysburg. Some resulted in 51,112 men dying that day. But God warned the President of the United States the night before, buckle up. Today's going to be a day that the nation will remember. What is God saying to you in dreams? Do you have questions about dreams? Please provide them in the comments. But as I leave you tonight, I want you to think, does God have an early warning system for you? Do you have a reoccurring dream? Does God have a way of warning you of things that are going to happen in your life? Do you know it? Have you discerned it? And can you tell what's going to happen? And more importantly, do you track it? This is why I write every single dream I have down. Because when somebody has a dream about somebody on the national level, maybe it's the president, maybe it's somebody in the news, maybe it's a cabinet member or somebody else, the first place we go is our database. And I go to my phone and I say, has God spoke to me about this person? And I end up finding I have 6 dreams. I have 8 dreams. And then I start seeing, when did he start speaking to me? What was happening? And you can begin to track historically. Sometimes God will give you a dream as a marker. The boat hadn't escaped. The boat dream with an unknown identity hadn't escaped to a dark and distant shore to Cuba until midway through the war. But God started giving Abraham Lincoln dreams about it before the bombing on Sumter. And he gave it to him the day that he died. What does God want to tell you? What does God want to tell the people that lead the nations of the world? What will you do? Is God calling you into spiritual intelligence? This is what we do. I have a whole cadre of people that we have trained in spiritual intelligence to look at history, to do research, to look into dreams, to find out what they mean, to find out what the code is, to it to decode the dream life of people, and to put all of these together on an encrypted server, so we have dreams from all over, from all kinds of different people, and we can put them together and we can say. And so now we know, if somebody has a dream about a ship moving to a dark and distant shore, God is speaking in the same language he spoke to Lincoln. What if somebody has a recurring dream and there's somebody of note politically? Well, maybe God is giving them a warning as well. And maybe it's a warning that happens consistently. If we write down the times, dates, and locations of when we dream, we can go back and we can reverse engineer and see what happened those days that God gave those dreams. And I'm telling you, it's going to blow your mind. I never thought in a million years, when I started down this pathway of looking at Lincoln, that there was an actual ship named Dream, chased by the Union Navy, left our territorial waters, sailed to a dark and distant shore to Cuba, and began to harass Spanish ships off the coast of Cuba, to the point that 2 different country ambassadors got involved, with the Secretary of State and with the President of the United States, who brings this to the Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Wells. God is still speaking in history. He's giving us this information now so we understand the precedence that he has in speaking to presidents, in speaking about ships, and in speaking in a reoccurring warning or alert system. He set it up for the President of the United States. Wouldn't he just do it again today? So think about it. If you're interested in being a part of a group of people that decode dreams, that advise leaders at all levels in a lot of different spheres, but particularly on the government side, then we would love to have you with us. You can go to dreamlifedecoded.com, or you can send me an email at dreamlifedecoded@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. What is God saying to you? Please put in the comments if you like this, if this meant something to you, if you were fascinated by what God did in the life of Abraham Lincoln. Through what we can tell, it was at least 9 occurrences of the same dream, and the outcome of what happened, and what God may want to warn us about today, or what God may want to tell us today. Could he use you? Absolutely. Could you be an early warning system for you, your family, for even your nation? Yes, you could be. Come and join us in spiritual intelligence. And until I see you next time, keep dreaming.